The engines were still warm when the silence arrived. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating quiet that settles after something irreversible has already happened. Rick from Murphy's Diesel had spent years building power, torque, reputation, and trust with his bare hands. Yet in a single stretch of time, everything he thought defined him began to fracture beneath the surface. To the world, he was a skilled diesel mind, a familiar face in a male-dominated industry fueled by grit and horsepower. But behind the noise of engines and the glow of shop lights lived a man quietly wrestling with pressure, expectations, and a fear he never voiced out loud. Success came faster than emotional readiness. Fame arrived without instruction, and the cost of carrying it all alone grew heavier with every passing mile. What happens when the person everyone relies on has no one left to lean on? When the man known for fixing broken machines begins to realize he may not know how to fix himself. This is not just a story about diesel or fame or business. It is a story about identity, silence, and the unseen weight carried by a man the world thought it already knew. The shop breathes before the sun fully rises. Fluorescent lights hum awake one by one, casting a pale, unforgiving glow over concrete floors stained by years of oil and effort. The air is thick, diesel fumes, warm metal, the faint metallic tang of grinding steel. Rick moves through it all with practiced precision, his boots echoing softly, his hands already knowing what to reach for before his mind has time to wander. Machines respond to him. Engines listen. Bolts loosen when he asks them to. In this space, control feels possible. Yet beneath the roar of an engine firing to life, something quieter unfolds. Rick is not surrounded by people, even when others are present. Conversations happen around him, not within him. He nods, listens, offers short answers, his attention split between the task in front of him and the unrelenting pressure behind his eyes. He has become the reliable one, the man who fixes what others cannot, the one expected to stay late, decide fast, and never hesitate. Admiration follows him through the shop like a shadow, but it never quite reaches his face. The narrator understands what Rick rarely allows himself to acknowledge. Leadership has slowly rewritten his emotional language. Strength, once a necessity, has hardened into expectation. Rest feels undeserved. Silence feels safer than honesty. Each successful job raises the bar higher, tightening an invisible grip around his chest. The shop that once offered refuge now demands everything in return. Late nights stretch longer. The shop grows quieter after hours, the absence of noise amplifying the thoughts Rick works so hard to suppress. He stares at an engine block long after the work is done, hands resting still, shoulders tense. The flicker of fluorescent light above him mirrors the exhaustion he refuses to name. There are calls he doesn't return, messages left unanswered. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know how to explain the weight pressing down on him without sounding weak. Others see success. Rick feels responsibility. They see a man in control. He feels the fear of losing it. At home, sleep comes in fragments. The smell of diesel lingers in his clothes, in his hair, in his dreams. His mind replays unfinished conversations, imagined failures, worst-case outcomes that never fully leave him. Even in rest, he remains on call, for problems, for expectations, for the image he has carefully built. Foreshadowing reveals itself in small moments. A pause before answering a simple question. A hand lingering on a tool he doesn't need. A deep breath taken when no one is watching. The shop has become both sanctuary and cage, a place where he feels most capable and most trapped at the same time. As Rick locks up for the night, the echo of the closing door rings louder than the engines ever did. Standing alone in the dim light, he senses a shift he cannot yet define. Success has given him everything he worked for, and quietly begun taking something back. What that cost truly remains unanswered, hanging heavy in the silence he carries with him into the dark. Long before the shop lights and the reputation, Rick learned what it meant to endure. Childhood did not arrive with dramatic catastrophe, but with something quieter and more shaping. Responsibility that settled early, expectations that went unspoken yet firmly enforced. In the spaces where comfort should have existed, There was instead an unyielding lesson. Survive first, feel later. If something broke, you fixed it. If something hurt, you carried it. The narrator sees the pattern forming long before Rick does. Emotion was never forbidden, just impractical. There was no time for hesitation, no room for softness. Rick learned to observe more than speak, to act more than explain. Praise was rare, but necessity was constant. He discovered early that reliability earned respect, and silence avoided conflict. Over time, those instincts hardened into identity. Machines entered his life not as hobbies, but as certainty. Engines made sense in a way people often did not. They followed rules. They responded to effort. When something failed, the cause could be traced, the solution earned. In a world that often felt unpredictable, Diesel offered structure, a language that didn't demand emotional translation. The smell of oil, the weight of tools, the rhythmic logic of mechanical systems became a refuge where Rick felt competent and grounded. Yet even then, the cost was quietly accumulating. Moments that might have invited rest were replaced by work. Fatigue was dismissed as weakness. Asking for help felt unnecessary, even dangerous. The young version of Rick absorbed the belief that strength meant carrying more than others, never letting the load show. Every challenge survived reinforced the idea that endurance alone was enough. The chapter shifts between past and present seamlessly. In the shop, Rick tightens a bolt with practiced force, unaware that the motion mirrors a younger version of himself gripping responsibility with the same intensity. The habits formed long ago still guide his hands, his decisions, his silence. What once kept him moving forward now prevents him from slowing down. Foreshadowing emerges in subtle echoes. The first night he stays late when no one asked him to. The first time exhaustion feels like proof of worth. The first moment he convinces himself that rest can wait. These are not dramatic turning points. They are quiet agreements he makes with himself, each one narrowing the path ahead. As the chapter closes, a question lingers beneath the surface. If survival becomes second nature, if pressure becomes familiar, how does a person recognize safety when it finally arrives? Rick steps further into the life he is building, unaware that the very strengths forged in pressure may one day demand a reckoning he is not prepared to face. Murphy's Diesel does not grow overnight. It accelerates. Momentum builds quietly at first, then all at once. More trucks arrive at the shop. More eyes follow Rick's work. His name begins to circulate in conversations he never hears directly, spoken with respect, sometimes with awe. To the outside world, this is the payoff. Proof that discipline, skill, and sacrifice have finally aligned. Inside, the experience feels very different. Rick moves faster now, not because he wants to, but because slowing down feels impossible. Each successful project brings another. Each solved problem raises expectations that cannot be lowered again. The shop hums constantly, alive with activity. Yet Rick's inner world grows increasingly muted. Applause never lingers. Satisfaction fades quickly. What remains is responsibility, heavier, louder, more demanding than before. He becomes less present without realizing it. Conversations shorten. Meals are skipped or eaten standing up. Relationships don't explode. They thin, stretched by absence rather than conflict. Rick tells himself this is temporary. Just one more job, one more push, one more late night. The narrator understands the quiet danger in that thinking, how temporary sacrifices often become permanent patterns. At night, when the shop finally empties, Rick stands amid the evidence of his success. The polished concrete reflects fluorescent light like a mirror he avoids looking into for too long. He listens to the ticking of cooling engines, a sound that should signal completion, but instead feels like countdown. His body is tired in ways sleep does not fix. His mind stays alert, scanning for problems that may or may not exist. The psychological pressure tightens subtly. Every decision feels consequential. Mistakes feel unforgivable. The identity he has built, capable, dependable, unbreakable, leaves no room for doubt. Vulnerability becomes a liability he cannot afford. He tells himself that loneliness is simply part of leadership, that this distance is the cost of ambition. Foreshadowing deepens through ignored signals. A tightening chest dismissed as stress. A rare day off interrupted by guilt. A fleeting thought, what happens if he stops? Quickly buried beneath responsibility. Rick does not feel like he is chasing success anymore. He feels like he is trying not to fall behind it. The chapter closes with a haunting stillness. Rick stands in the center of the shop, surrounded by proof that his hard work paid off. Yet for the first time, the question slips in uninvited and refuses to leave. If everything he built depends on him never slowing down, what happens when? Pressure rarely announces when it becomes too much. It accumulates quietly, layering itself into every decision, every breath, every sleepless night. By the time Rick recognizes the weight, it has already woven itself into his identity. He no longer remembers what life felt like without urgency humming beneath the surface. The shop, once expansive, begins to feel confining. The same walls that witnessed his rise now echo his unease. Sounds sharpen, the clang of metal, the hiss of air tools, the low rumble of engines, each one landing heavier than before. Rick's focus fractures. He notices himself rereading the same measurements, second-guessing decisions that once came naturally. The confidence people admire now demands constant maintenance. Fear emerges not as panic, but as vigilance. Fear of letting someone down. Fear of missing a detail. Fear that the image everyone trusts is more fragile than it appears. Rick carries it silently, convinced that acknowledging it would make it real. Instead, he pushes harder, mistaking endurance for control. Sleep becomes unreliable. When rest comes, it is shallow, interrupted by thoughts he cannot switch off. His body sends signals he refuses to interpret. Headaches, tension, a persistent tightness that follows him everywhere. He tells himself it will pass. It always has before. But this time something shifts. Moments of quiet no longer bring relief. They bring confrontation. Alone in the shop after hours, Rick feels the weight of every expectation pressing inward. The narrator observes the internal fracture forming, the realization that continuing like this is no longer sustainable, paired with the terror of not knowing another way to exist. Guilt seeps in from all directions. Guilt for feeling overwhelmed when others believe he has everything. Guilt for resenting the very success he worked so hard to earn. Isolation deepens, not because no one is around, but because Rick cannot imagine explaining what he feels without dismantling the version of himself others rely on. The breaking point is not loud. There is no dramatic collapse, no spectacle. It arrives as stillness. Rick stands motionless, hands resting on cold metal, breathing shallowly, aware for the first time that sheer willpower is no longer enough. The thought surfaces unfiltered and frighteningly clear. He cannot keep going like this. The shop lights flicker as one shuts off automatically, plunging part of the room into shadow. The visual feels symbolic, unavoidable. Rick does not panic. He does not cry. He simply stands there, suspended between who he has been and who he might have to become. The chapter ends at the edge of uncertainty. Rick knows something must change. He just doesn't know whether stepping into that change will save him or cost him everything he has built. Silence follows the breaking point, not immediately, but inevitably. The kind of silence that feels unfamiliar, almost intrusive, when motion has defined so much of life. Rick finds himself in spaces without constant demand. Fewer late nights, fewer distractions, more room for thought. At first, the quiet feels unbearable. Without noise, the questions surface. Who is he when he is not producing? When he is not solving problems, carrying weight, proving endurance? The narrator traces the discomfort of this phase, the awkwardness of rest, the guilt that lingers even when slowing down becomes necessary. Healing does not arrive as relief. It arrives as confrontation. Rick begins to see his past more clearly. The patterns forged in childhood. The way strength became armor. The way success reinforced silence instead of connection. These realizations do not undo the damage, but they reshape his understanding of it. For the first time, he allows the idea that survival and fulfillment are not the same thing. The shop remains part of his life, but its meaning changes. It is no longer the sole measure of worth. Engines still roar, tools still clatter, but Rick's relationship to them softens. He no longer disappears inside the work completely. There is space now, imperfect, fragile space for reflection. Legacy enters the story not as reputation, but as impact. Rick begins to understand that what lasts is not how much he carried, but what he allowed himself to become beyond endurance. Strength, redefined, includes honesty. Leadership includes humanity. Survival includes rest. The chapter closes with Rick standing once more in the shop, light streaming through the open door. He is not fully healed. The weight is not gone. But he is no longer pretending it doesn't exist. The silence no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like possibility. An unfinished chapter still being written, shaped not by pressure alone, but by purpose rediscovered.